Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via YouTube, Stitcher and the Apple Podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Well, welcome to a very special episode in which we bring you the speeches from our recent Freedom of Speech Just Watch What You Say event held at the Green Dragon here in Croydon. Mike, how was the evening for you?
Really good evening, really pleasing to talk about something as important as free speech. We had Harry Fone from the Taxpayers Alliance. Harry's the grassroots campaign manager. He's done lots of work in Croydon, and lots of you will know him, and he was talking about the NHS and spending and the impact there. Sean Finch from the Libertarian Party. Sean has done other events with us before. Big free speech advocate. Lots of interesting stuff to say about how really we're no longer a free speech society. We don't compare well to many countries around the world. Izzy Montague from Croydon Christian mum, as she's described. Izzy had some challenges with a local school and their desire to teach her children and her inability to take them away from lessons that really are issues of parental concern rather than education concern. And of course David Kurten, David we've had before, the London Assembly member, really summing up around the whole issue of free speech and some of his experiences of being attacked by the Twitter mob. Really good evening for everyone. A passionate crowd of people that are concerned about this great fundamental freedom that we have, and that is sadly ebbing away.
Absolutely, yeah. Some great speeches. Some controversial subjects were covered, no doubt, and those were discussed later on in a good Q&A session. Unfortunately, we had a few technical difficulties with the Q&A session, so whilst we've recorded the speeches properly, the Q&A didn't sadly record properly. But Mike, it was certainly a passionate Q&A.
It was, and you know, we said at the start that some things might be said that would upset people, and they did. And do you know what? That's part of free speech. It's part of your right to walk away from free speech as well, not be forced to hear things you don't want to hear. So that was good. Freedom is messy, and that played out a bit. But we all had a drink afterwards and got on, and that's exactly how it should be. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. You're free to say what you like, and that was the point that came out of the evening overall. So just before we go to the speeches, just a little disclaimer, if we can. The views expressed by the speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Croydon Constitutionalists, but we would definitely defend these people's right to say what they said. So without further ado, we give you freedom of speech. Just watch what you say. We've got four great speakers who've agreed to come and speak to you tonight, and they will definitely be speaking freely. So our first speaker this evening, I'm delighted to say, is Harry Fone, who is the grassroots campaign manager from the Taxpayers Alliance. Some of you may recognise Harry from some photos and videos that we've done when we've been working with the Taxpayers Alliance here over the last few months. And Harry gets around the country helping people out all over the country, looking into waste and corruption in all parts of the country, in councils in particular. So without further ado, I give you our first speaker this evening, Harry Fone.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming along this evening and giving up your Wednesday evening to listen to some hopefully quite controversial opinions. And when I was asked to speak here, because I work for the Taxpayers Alliance, I have to be a little bit careful in what I say, and I want to try and make it relevant to the what the organisation sets out to achieve, which is fundamentally to achieve the best value possible for our taxes that we pay. And unfortunately, the tax burden in this country is at a near 50-year high, and I suspect many of you are not happy with the public services that we receive. That's certainly the feedback I get from around the country. So my original topic was going to be on why you cannot criticise the NHS. And then I realised actually this was fundamentally flawed. You can criticise the NHS. We see stories every day in the newspapers about the NHS wasting money and such like. A simple Google search will reveal thousands of results. So I've tailored it. My argument is that you can criticise the NHS, but the one thing you cannot do is say that the NHS does not need more money. This is not a narrative that we hear a lot of. Every major party backs more money for the NHS. The Conservatives have recently pledged something like, £20 billion, and indeed in the latest spending review I think there's been a pledge of even more money. Labour, much the same, Liberal Democrats, Greens, etc. The Taxpayers Alliance has a perception that it is a branch of the Conservative Party. I'd like to state that is categorically not true. We have gone after all parties, particularly during the expenses scandal when MPs were ripping us off left, right and centre. So I come at this from a pretty neutral point of view. Sean will know that I have worked with the Libertarian Party. I will call to question local and national bureaucrats wherever that can be done. So, NHS expenditure currently stands at about £145 billion per year. That is out of a total government expenditure of £800 billion. So it's a pretty sizable sum already. And the idea that it needs more money seems fairly perverse to me. And you hear these stories of austerity. The Tories are responsible for austerity. Would anyone like to guess by how much, in percentage terms, between 2009 and 2017, how much, in percentage terms, in real terms, how much spending actually fell by in this country? 5%? 10%? Any guesses? 0.2%, exactly. Pretty much negligible. And in fact, in cash terms, spending actually went up. And a common narrative you will hear, as well as the fact that there was austerity, is that the NHS is slowly being privatised by the back door, which to me has always seemed like a fairly laughable argument. I mean, to what extent do you want to take this? Often the argument is made that it's privatisation if you get outside cleaning contractors in, for example. Even if that is, you will get a better level of service and you will do it at less expense to the taxpayer. Or even if you get the same level of service but at less expense to the taxpayer, that seems that it can only be a good thing. But how far do these people want to take it? Do they want the computers to be made by a nationalised company? Do they want the bedpans to be made by a nationalised company? Do they want the electrical sockets, for example, to be made by a nationalised company? How far do they really want to take this? It often reminds me of a famous libertarian joke, which is when you espouse libertarian views that you'd like private companies to do everything, the question that comes back is, but who will build the roads? Well, the answer is private companies. Private companies do a lot of these things. Government is just, quite frankly, an annoying middleman a lot of the time that often balls us up. That's not to say they can't do it correctly. They are fully capable of doing it, but there are too many bureaucrats, unfortunately. So let's get back to the spending issue, though. They've had this, massive increase in spending. £145 billion we're up to now. But how many of you have confidence in the NHS despite all this extra money? I mean, I've got some stats here. So let's look at, what should we look at? NHS errors. A total of 629 never events, and these are events meaning they are so serious they should never happen. So 629 of these events occurred between April 2018 and July 2019 in NHS hospitals. That's 9 patients every week. And this is the supposed envy of the world. Gagging orders. NHS hospitals effectively paralysed a young boy for life and then tried to gag his family from speaking out. Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust threatened legal action unless the child's father watered down his account of the event on the grounds it was too emotional and too critical. Is that really an example of a health service that cares? And then you may have seen the story the other day about cancer survival rates based on a World Health Report. Out of seven advanced countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway, Denmark, Ireland and the UK, Britain's ability to keep alive those suffering from cancer is the worst. And I think, the results... Now, you may say, okay, well, yes, it's bad. That's exactly why it needs more money. Okay, well, let's try this on for size. As I said, I literally did some Googling today about NHS waste, and then, sure enough, I had a call on the media phone requesting a quote, which was that NHS GPs and dentists had defrauded the taxpayer to the tune of £214 million this year. This was claiming for things that they'd never bought or hours that they'd never actually worked and expense. And they actually reckon that the amount of fraud in the NHS is equivalent to £1.3 billion every year. Now, you could argue that compared to 145 billion, that's only about 1%. But if that's just fraud, that's not when you're getting into waste. And indeed, there was a story last week that the NHS, and this is a good thing, the NHS is now saving £300 million in prescriptions. But there is still further to go. They have very poor procurement. For example, there was a story not so long ago that some trusts are paying £2 for 100 plasters, where other trusts pay £22 for 100 plasters. Now, an organisation as big as the NHS, and I think I'm right in saying it employs something like 1.5 million people, of which, by the way, only 33% are doctors and nurses. Surely it can use this massive buying potential to get better economies of scale and thus bring down the price of these goods. But seemingly they are incapable of doing that. And I urge you to go and literally put into Google NHS wasting money, taxpayers, and you will see countless articles by the Taxpayers Alliance where we've commented on these things, and indeed many other stories about this. But there is a serious point to all this, which is I think many people believe that the NHS is a good thing. Its intentions are good, and having healthcare free at the point of access is a good thing. Now, my worry is that if these issues are not rectified and people are not free to criticise and say it does not need more money, what it needs is improvements in efficiency, then it's simply going to crumble and cease to exist. And I think one of the ways I'm seeing this happen is anyone familiar with a private police force called My Local Bobby?
Yes.
Right, yes, I'm sure. I knew Sean would have heard of it. This was set up by two former Metropolitan police officers, and basically, it is you can rent a police officer or police officers, and it's been very successful in richer parts of London, Mayfair, Kensington, Belgravia, those sorts of places. But due to the inefficiencies in the police force, people have resorted to hiring private security essentially to keep them safe. What's now happening is, like you saw with mobile phones and cars, where they were originally only available to those who were earning more money, it is now being rolled out across the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think we've got this interesting scenario where the private sector is going to do things better and more efficiently than the public sector. And this is already happening in medicine as well. You have Babylon and Cured. So Babylon, you can get 24/7 medical advice over your mobile phone or tablet or computer, whatever. You can have a face-to-face, I say face-to-face, albeit through a screen, digital consultation with a doctor who can write you a prescription. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've got to wait in maybe 4 hours in A&E or 2 hours at the GP surgery or whatever just to get a prescription, I'd much rather do it over the mobile phone. Similarly, there is a service called Cured, with a Q, that you can have a doctor delivered to your door, essentially, much like Uber. Now, I'm not saying it's cheap, it's not, but as these things roll out more and more people take it up, there's that competition comes into the market, price goes down, quality goes up. So, to sum up, I think the NHS is at a crossroads. I think either politicians need to start being honest that throwing money is not the answer. Throwing money at the problem is not the answer. Instead, it needs radical reform. I think essentially it's become so big now, it's become such a behemoth that it is, dare I say, almost unstoppable. But I hope it is not beyond repair, because I think it would be a loss to the British public. But if they don't do this, if they aren't honest with themselves, it will cease to be. Anyway, so that was my attempt to say something controversial. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I thank you for listening this evening.
Thank you very much, Harry, for discussing the sacred cow that is the NHS. Moving swiftly on, our next speaker this evening is Finch. Sean is a member of the Libertarian Party. For those of you that don't know, the equivalent of the Libertarian Party, funnily enough called the Libertarian Party, is the third biggest party in the United States. Sean was the Libertarian Party candidate in the Lewisham East by-election a couple of years ago, which was a somewhat controversial by-election, especially in respect to public meetings, indeed. We're very, very welcome to come and speak to us this evening. Thanks, Sean.
Hello. I pretty much give this same speech pretty much every time I come to the stage, but I thought I'd write it down for once just so I can bang this out within 10 minutes hopefully. Yesterday when I got home from work, I thought I'll quickly write up a couple of examples explaining how I personally think we're not really too free anymore. And I started thinking of all these examples and it just went on and on and on and on. So I managed to narrow it down to a few examples of how it is, and hopefully I can get it all through within the 10-minute slot. So, freedom of speech is the core value of any Western democracy. For any liberal society to function, we need free speech. The US got it right. They have a written constitution with freedom of speech being their First Amendment. It's not their 12th, it's not their 20th. It's their First Amendment. Because those founding fathers realized hundreds of years ago that all your freedoms come from that seed. And if you do not have the ability to criticize and scrutinize ideas, not out of malice, not out of hatred, but to simply improve society, then nothing else matters. Without that seed, there is no tree. Without our speech, there is no liberty. However, unfortunately in the UK, we no longer have freedom of speech. For now, we instead have hate speech laws, such as Section 5 of the Public Order Act 1986, which quotes, threatening or abusive words or behaviour or disorderly behaviour within the hearing of sight or a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress. It's all very vague, isn't it? Very vague definition. One that could be weaponised to silence people, one may argue. Well, last year in London, there was a vegan festival. A man was arrested under this very act for eating meat in front of vegans. Was he doing it to provoke vegans? Yes. Should he have been arrested? No. Regardless if he was eating a dead squirrel. That's another matter, right? Or Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003, a law used in February this year to detain a mother for purposely, incorrectly using a transgender individual, referring to that individual as a man, on Twitter. Kate Scottow of Hertfordshire faced the CPS in Stevenage Magistrates Court today. I don't know what the outcome was at this moment. Using the Freedom of Information requests, it was found that 3,395 people across 29 forces were arrested in 2016 under Section 127 of the Communications Act. Although 15 forces didn't submit the data, meaning that the real figure is probably higher. In 2017, 1,696 people were charged and 1,399 people were convicted, out of total 4,000 arrests. Compared that to Russia last year, a country which is apparently renowned for abusing civil liberties. How many do you think? More than 4,000 or lower?
About between 100 and 200 in Russia.
400.
400, so not quite.
So a country where apparently, which abuses civil liberties, somehow, whether you believe this data or not, I don't know, but according officially, it's lower than us. That is a 900% increase in some areas since 2014. None of these 4,000 people, in my opinion, should have been arrested. Some may ask, But how can this be? I'm sure I've heard we have some kind of unwritten UK constitution, which surely must protect our speech, right? Wrong. We don't really have a constitution in the terms of protecting civil liberties. We do indeed have all of these renowned documents, such as the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, and we also have common law. But in my opinion, none of these actually mean anything if it's not in a codified written constitution. As Hugh Tomlinson, QC, states, the problem lies with the lack of a UK constitution. Free speech does not, historically, have the same primacy under English law as the US. A proper written constitution limits on the powers of the institutions of government, such as the police. But the loose and flexible set of rules that is described as Britain's unwritten constitution sets no such limits. We don't have a constitution, people, at least one that you think protects your rights. In fact, we are only one of 5 countries left without a written constitution. Our constitution is as follows. Parliament is sovereign. That basically means that Parliament can do whatever it wants and make it up as it goes along. And if these past 3 years have not highlighted this, it seriously does highlight that we need a constitutional reform. Now, instead of me speaking about how much speech itself is important, and I'm sure hear the same old trolls and points about why freedom of speech is important, instead I'll give you some real current examples of what's going on. In February 2019, Christian preacher, and I'm going to butcher this name and apologise, Oluwo Ilesami, was approached by 2 police officers. They asked him to stop preaching. When he refused, they confiscated the preacher's Bible, handcuffed him, and drove him a few miles away, and then released him. In July this year, he was awarded £3,000 for wrongful arrest. It should have never happened. They should have got more money as well, in my opinion. Met Police spokesmen defended the treatment, saying that while the police respect free speech, if the language, quote, if the language someone uses is perceived as being a potential hate crime, it is only right that we investigate. In the case, it was deemed appropriate to remove the man from the area. Not even a complaint was issued. Just the police deciding what speech is more equal than others. In December 2017, another preacher, Daniel Courtney in Lincolnshire, was arrested and convicted under Section 5 of the Public Order Act. As someone said, his words were violence. As heard in Lincolnshire Magistrates' Courts, he was convicted. It was only overturned via an appeal during Christmas. Should have never happened. Just a few days ago, the iconic, much-loved children's TV character Fireman Sam was dropped by Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue. Why? Well, it seems the character is suddenly now too non-inclusive and politically incorrect. In my opinion, this PC culture has devastated our society. Although well-intentioned, it is authoritarianism with a smile. Or as the late American comedian George Carlin said, it's fascism pretending to be manners. Now, this is a little bit personal to me because I was an on-call firefighter up to about a month ago. And this sort of thing goes on all the time, and I wasn't surprised when I heard it, because what's going on now, before I went on my career break, hence why I got a beard for the first time in many years now. You're not allowed a beard in the fire service. It apparently blocks all the breathing apparatus. But the last thing I heard before I went off station was that they were thinking of changing. I've got to explain this. Basically, when you roll out lay flat holes, to extend the holes, depending on where the fire is from the pump, you have to extend the hoses. And basically you have the male coupling and the female coupling. The male coupling obviously goes into the female coupling. You never guess what the new controversy is. What do you think? What do you think the new controversy is? It's sexist. It's not right. Hundreds of years that has been the normal way. And all of a sudden, it's a problem. I don't know why. But in my opinion, political correctness has infected all fire services and other emergency services, notably the police. I can say most firefighters are miserable because of it. The last discussion on station... Oh, I've said that, sorry. There is a line from Pink Floyd's song called Time. One of the quotes is, "Quiet desperation is the English way." As each week, both firefighters and postmen, so I work in Royal Mail too, are made to watch these videos which feel more like a re-education camp on how we need to be more inclusive, how we need to behave. Behind closed doors, many are sick of it, and you certainly cannot speak out against it. Or have online opinions, or you'll be sacked, or maybe even worse. As I know one colleague certainly was. They've taken the joy out of everything in the name of diversity and inclusiveness. All just meaningless buzzwords to justify diversity officers' jobs and push a destructive, regressive agenda. I bet no one even complained about Fireman Sam. It's all just faux outrage. Next example, freedom of the press and the yellow vests. Some of you might think, yellow vests, that's all over, isn't it? Nope, it's still going on. In fact, it will now be the 45th consecutive protest this weekend. Almost 1 year of protests and violent reaction from the police. Isn't it amazing how the UK have been given a D notice by the Ministry of Defence to make the mainstream media not report on these protests for reason of national security? A very vague concept in itself. But yet are allowed, the mainstream media, to report on the Hong Kong protests. Why is one set of protests permitted but another is not? Could this be something to do with the EU, perhaps telling the UK to not shine a spotlight on one of the EU's key contributors? I don't know, it's just my guess. You would think surely the logic from the MOD would be more likely to issue a D notice about Hong Kong, as we, up to 97, used to rule them. The Hong Kong protesters are begging us to take them back rather than be under the communist China. Next example, state schools. Certainly mostly highlighted in Birmingham, but it's also happening here in Croydon. And I'm so glad we actually do have a speaker here that's going to be on after me that's actually caught in the fray of it about this issue. The issue is that what's currently going on is that local bodies want LGBTQ topics to be taught to very young kids. Now that's not entirely the issue. Most of the mainstream media and LGBT community have chosen to go with the narrative that the reason why protests are occurring is simply because they must be homophobic. But that's not it. It's actually far more complex. Me personally, I'm a libertarian. I don't care what you identify. I don't care about your race, don't care about your gender, don't care about your sexuality, what religion you choose to follow. That's just me. The real question is, who owns your children? Do you own your children, or does the state own your children? Should you as a parent have a say in what is being taught on the curriculum, or should the government tell you what is being taught? But I'm just going to quickly finish this now. But I'll leave you with one quote. There's many other examples I could just go on about. But I'll leave you with one quote from former US President Ronald Reagan. And it simply is, freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. It must be fought for, protected and handed down to our children for them to do the same. Otherwise we will spend our sunset years telling our children's children what it was once like when men were free. Thank you.
Thank and Sean. Well, as Sean just alluded to, we do have a bit of a star here with us tonight. Izzy Montague, who I believe has been on, was it Good Morning Britain, was it?
Yes, it was, yeah.
I've seen this on the YouTube. I'll let Izzy tell her story and say her own piece, but essentially Izzy was one of a number of parents who were dismayed to come to know that the school was running a compulsory Pride event for I think primary school children, and when she opposed this, she was told, well, no, you can either leave your kid in school or you can take them out, and that's it, really. So she's a local Croydon resident and obviously has a very interesting story to tell. So without further ado, I give you Izzy Montague.
Hello everyone. So that was a brief introduction. That's exactly what happened. I'm just a local resident. My child was going to the local school, and all of a sudden, one day, I found out in the newspaper that at the school that my son was attending, he was 4 years old at the time, was decided to celebrate LGBT month. I didn't know anything about it. In inquiring to find out if this was something that was optional, it wasn't. And after they did the Pride event, I thought that was going to be it, basically. But I was told that no, this is something that's going to be continuous, and it's going to be something that the school will stand by. We were approached with this attitude that because I believe something to do with our race as well, that we should be more than forthcoming with this because we are all classed together in this kind of minority, victim, signalling group, and that we should just all be happy for everyone to celebrate things that they're not unhappy with. I've been born here, been raised here, and I've always believed that everyone should be able to be free to do as they want. I am a Christian and I'm very liberal. I believe in free will. So I believe that if you're not happy with something about me, if you don't want, I'm not pushing my faith, I'm not pushing my culture onto anybody. So I was quite shocked that a school believed that we should be happy with something, because I've never requested for anybody to celebrate what I do or our culture. So as a result, we had to remove our son from that school, and where we are at the moment, we're in a legal battle with the school. But it's something that I've come across now. I was on Victoria, Derbyshire last week, and there was a teacher who was reading exactly what was going to be on the curriculum, because I think with all the protests that's been happening in Birmingham, there's this kind of the media trying to make out that we're trying to feel that our children are turning into gay people or whatever that may be. And that's not the problem that we do have. The problem that a lot of parents are facing is more to do with that we are being pushed into having to accept something that we don't want to, and you should have every right not to accept it. Like I said, I'm not expecting anyone to accept my culture. It can be at odds with your own culture, and that's fine as long as you can do what you can do and I can do what I do. I think that should be fine. But what the school is actually saying is that no, they are saying that at one hand they respect our culture, our beliefs, but at the same time they're saying that you have to be forced to actually celebrate what other people do. And it's got nothing to do with us saying that our children are going to turn something. It's more to do with the fact that we don't want to celebrate it, and we have every right to send our children into a school without having to celebrate anything. So that includes anybody else's religion, anybody else's culture, anybody's belief. Everyone has that right to send their children into a school just for an academic education. On this show last week, or 2 weeks ago, the book that was read so nicely, And honestly, the teacher didn't understand, who read this story, didn't understand what was the big deal. And the book was completely pushing a narrative that you should accept something that you can be completely against, and that you should be happy for your children to learn this just because it makes other people's feelings, okay. Regardless if it makes your feelings, not okay, other people's feelings is more important. And, we have to, there's this thing that we're being bullied. We're being bullied by, I don't know if it's a minority, I don't know if it's quite a few people, but there is this feeling that we are being bullied, we're being silenced, and freedom, there is no freedom. At one hand we're being told that this is about freedom, that this is about everybody being themselves, but it's not. It's about us having to conform to other people's standards or other people's beliefs. And it is a belief, the whole anybody's sexual orientation. There's many studies. I am a scientist, and it's not a scientific fact. So it is a belief, and you have every right to say, I don't subscribe to it, and I just want to go work, I just want to have an education. And they're using our children for this, because there are no adults that go to work that have to conform, to have to celebrate anything, that have to take part in any pride marches. Why is it children that they're targeting? And they are easy, vulnerable tools to manipulate into another generation of these, I don't know what it is, accepting. We can see it a lot going on in politics around in America. We've got, somebody that I look to is Candice Owens, and she speaks up very much about conservatives having to, we're not allowed to be conservatives if we look a certain way. And that's the same thing with regards to in this country. As soon as you speak opposite about something, you're completely shouted down. So I'm not allowed to speak about this because of my race. I'm expected to accept everything. And I think, that's what the main thing is that this isn't freedom. Freedom shouldn't be forcing other people's children to take on board what everybody else, thinks is right or wrong. So, yeah, sorry. Sorry for rambling.
That's brilliant. Thank you all so much. Our final speaker this evening, before we take a break, is David Kurten. David is, I'm afraid, an actual elected politician. Outrageous. Waste of money. He's an assembly member for the Brexit Alliance. He's very much a free speech advocate. And before he entered politics, he was a chemistry teacher, including in many places around the world, but also the Royal Russell School here in Croydon. So I give you David Kurten.
Thank you. Fantastic. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. And as you said, Harry, it was a long time ago. I did teach in Croydon, and I lived in Croydon for 2.5 years over in the Royal Russell School. I think that was right back in 2001 to 2003. So it's a very long time ago. And it's changed so much, Croydon, now. There's all these new skyscrapers going up that weren't here before, so it's a little bit disconcerting when I come in on the train. Anyway, that wasn't what I was going to talk about. We're here to talk about free speech. And I know some of you follow me on Twitter, which is a very good thing. And on Saturday, I put out a tweet, as you do. And the tweet I put out had 6 statements in it. There are 2 sexes, not 100 genders. Mass rapid immigration is unsustainable. There is no climate emergency. Boys need fathers. Sharia law is incompatible with English law. Unborn children are children. Hashtag free speech. Thank you very much. To my mind, those are very banal, mediocre, innocuous statements of just common sense and truth. Some of you might disagree with some of them, or one of them, or two of them, but to me there's nothing particularly controversial about them, and perhaps 20 or 30 years ago everybody else wouldn't have seen any of those statements as controversial. But the reaction I got to that tweet was absolutely astounding. I actually got more likes and retweets and comments both on Twitter and Facebook and Gab than any other social media post that I've put out in 10 years of actually being on social media. Really was quite astounding, just for putting out those few statements. And these are some of the comments that I got back. You're hiding behind free speech. Classic. There is a climate emergency, you reprobate. Don't mistake free speech for your bigotry. Where do you even begin when an elected representative has thoughts like this? Those are some of the negative comments. But actually, the vast majority of comments were positive. I got a lot of people saying spot on, I agree with you 100%. A couple of people even said boom, which is very nice. But there were some longer ones as well. Wow, just wow, brave man. Who's going to post his bail for saying this? It's so refreshing to hear common sense. Please run for mayor. Somebody needed to say it. Are you looking forward to a stint at Her Majesty's pleasure in Pentonville? Thank God you have lifted my spirits. I now realise I am not alone. That was kind of the most poignant of the comments that I got back, actually. You're a star for boldly saying these. Be careful, you'll be receiving a visit from Cairn Stalk Police with talk like that. I can't believe we live in a time when statements like this cause controversy. And I was just thinking, what is it about us here now that we've come to a point where these kind of statements bring that kind of reaction where people half-jokingly say, oh, beware, you're going to get a knock on the door, you might end up in prison. Because that wasn't the case 20 or 30 years ago, but it is the case now, as we've had examples from our wonderful speakers so far about some of the cases which are going on, where the police have come and arrested people or locked them up or driven them 5 miles into the countryside and dropped them off and so on. Now, I've always been against this political correctness for a very, very long time, which is why I joined UKIP about 7 years ago. I'm now sit on the London Assembly as a Brexit Alliance independent, but I joined because it seemed to be the only party that was against this suffocating culture of political correctness that we've got and is in our country all over the Western world and is growing and growing. And I got even more interested specifically in free speech a couple of years ago when something happened to me and I got a massive attack just for saying something that I thought was just an opinion. And I was standing 2 years ago in the UKIP leadership election in 2017. And there's an organisation that's affiliated, sort of semi-detached to UKIP, called Support for the Family. And they send a questionnaire out to all of the candidates with some questions about your attitudes to family values, to Islam, to LGBT, and various kind of things. So I answered all the questions. One of them was, do you believe in same-sex marriage? I said no. I think marriage is a man and a woman. And if I had a free vote in Parliament, vote of conscience, I would vote to restore the definition that marriage is a man and a woman. I thought that was just a reasonable opinion. Some people would agree, some people wouldn't agree. Another one of the questions was, do you think sexual orientation is fixed at birth? I said no, I don't think so. There's no such thing as a gay gene, and that's actually been proven a couple of weeks ago, now beyond a shadow of a doubt, with the research that has come out and been publicised everywhere. And I also said there are some studies that show there's a higher rate of child sexual abuse among the homosexual community than in the general population. Now that's a statement of fact. There are some studies that have come to that conclusion. So I thought, well, that's fine. I can just say that, no problem. I got a whole storm of hatred coming my way and people trying to smear my reputation. And there was a group in UKIP at the time which was called LGBT in UKIP. I don't think it exists anymore. But they set up an open petition calling on me to be thrown out of the leadership contest and thrown off the London Assembly and thrown out of my position as UKIP's education spokesman. And this magazine called Pink News picked up on my answers, and I was the top story in Pink News for about 2 days. What a terrible homophobe is standing for the UKIP leadership. And it was also picked up by the Evening Standard and the Independent, even got into the Mirror. And I got all sorts of comments coming my way on social media. The first time that happens, when there's a huge full spectrum attack on your reputation, it's absolutely horrible. I thought, what have I done? It was very, very depressing. I really didn't know what to do because this kind of thing had never happened to me before. I was only kept afloat mentally because I had some people who did come and support me, not least among them Raheem Kassam, who some of you might know, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Breitbart London. People like him supported me and others supported me, which really helped me through because it's not very nice when people come at you from every direction just because you think you've said something, but obviously you've crossed some barrier which somebody has put up that you don't know about that says, you must not say this, you must not have these opinions. If you have these opinions, we're going to try and get you kicked out of your positions and ruin and destroy your reputation. A similar thing happened to me earlier this year as well. But I was more prepared for it this time because it happened 2 years ago. But this time it was to do with Brexit. And there was a story in the paper which was completely ridiculous, Project Fear story, that said, if we leave the EU, we're more likely to get hit by space debris because we won't be in the European Space Agency and they won't be monitoring for asteroids which are going to hit Britain. And I thought that was just such a ridiculous story. So I put out a tweet linking to it and I said, Project Fear goes full retard. If we leave the EU, that means we're going to get hit by space debris. How ridiculous. And I got a huge storm coming my way because I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say retard. I said it as a joke because it's a line from a film which is a well-known meme on social media. There's a film starring Ben Stiller, Hollywood actor from 2009, called Tropic Thunder, and there's a line in it, you might have seen the little meme, black guy talking to Ben Stiller. He said, "You went full retard, never go full retard." It's quite a funny line from a film. So I thought, okay, well, I can just say that as a bit of a joke. But I had, actually, it was very surprising, lots of people who worked in mental health charities and the people they were linked to on social media all started having a go at me. You said retard. This is a hate crime. This is hate speech. Don't you know how hurtful you are? You should be ashamed of yourself. Are you going to apologise? Now, because I've been through the experience before, I thought, well, this is going to blow over in 4 or 5 days. So I just ignored it and I didn't write anything back. And sure enough, it died down. But one of them decided to write to the Labour AMs on the London Assembly, and they brought it up and they asked Sadiq Khan what he thought of me for saying this, and he had to little sort of go, he didn't mention my name as well, these people don't realise how hurtful they are and so on. And the Evening Standard picked up on that and did another hit job on me. So this is kind of where we are. People have tried to take me down a couple of times just for saying things that I thought were completely innocuous. weren't crimes, but they tried to make me feel as though they were, and to destroy my reputation. But I've survived, but that isn't the case for some people. As some of you mentioned already, Izzy, what happened to you, and Sean, you mentioned Pastor Oluwole Ilesani. And I know his name because I was very proud to represent him and ask about his case to the mayor, to Sadiq Khan. And I said to him in the London Assembly, what's going on with Pastor Olu? Here he is, he's been arrested by the police for reading out of the Bible, and he was arrested and then de-arrested in the middle of Hertfordshire, in the middle of nowhere, with no money, no way to get back, and just dropped off. He was like a 64-year-old man, very gentle. He wouldn't answer about the specific case. That's how politicians always avoid answering the questions. And, well, I can't talk about this specific case because it's going through a disciplinary process or so on. But then I asked him, well, Mr. Mayor, can anyone read from any part of the Bible on the streets of London without the fear of being arrested by the police? And it was like a wave of shock went through the chamber there. The Labour AMs were like, they gasped in horror that I dared to ask such a question. They were going to heckle me, because they heckle me quite a lot. But then they kind of like did a double take and realised, well, we can't really heckle him because that's kind of having a go at Christians. And so I got them in a little bit of a pickle there. And the mayor just wouldn't give me a straight answer. He couldn't give a straight answer. He wouldn't do it. At the time. So that was very interesting. But we have got these kind of cases that are going on, and I do know that we haven't yet got to the point in defending freedom where we have to do what our forefathers did. You know, our forefathers had to defend our freedom by shedding their blood on the beaches of Normandy to fight the National Socialists of Hitler. We haven't yet got to that point. But we have got to the point where people are being thrown out of their jobs for having the wrong opinion. Now, there's a great teacher that I have met. His case was in the press a couple of years ago. A teacher called Joshua Sutcliffe, who's a maths teacher in Oxfordshire. Lovely guy. And he called a girl. But this was a girl who said that she was a boy. And so now with this whole kind of transgender guidelines, you have to affirm people's gender dysphoria. If someone says, I'm not the sex that I am, schools are making guidance say, you must affirm them rather than treating it as a mental condition as it is. So he called this girl a girl. And he was suspended and then ultimately fired from his job. So we're in the situation now where you must affirm the delusion that somebody has if they say that they're not the sex that they are. So this is where we are. Another person in the papers this weekend, a professor from Sussex University called Kathleen Stock. And she wrote on social media that she was opposed to the new Gender Recognition Act, which was going to be brought in by Theresa May's administration, which was going to say that anybody can say, wake up in the morning and say you're a different gender, and everyone must recognise that and affirm it and use the pronouns that you tell them to use, and if they don't, that will become some kind of crime and sackable offence if you're in a job. So this is where we are. That hasn't been brought in. Thank goodness Boris Johnson's prorogues Parliament. So I don't know what's going to happen in the new parliamentary session, whether he'll try to bring it back or not. That didn't go through as a law. Hopefully Boris Johnson will row back from that and he won't try to bring it back in as a law. But if he does, that's going to be something else that will curtail our freedom of speech even more in this particular area. Different examples. Some of you may have know of Lauren Southern, a Canadian journalist. And a couple of years ago, you may know the story, she went to Luton with a group of people doing a kind of social experiment, and when she held a placard up saying Allah is gay. And that's probably not the wisest thing to do in Luton, actually, but some Muslims that were around complained to the police, and they said that she's in breach of the Public Order Act. You had to put the placard away and go away. And she did that. She went away doing journalism around the world, but then tried to come back into the country earlier this year and found that she'd been put on some kind of list that said that the border police should not let her into the country. So she wasn't let into the country, she's banned from the United Kingdom. They arrested her and held her under the Terrorism Act, and then shoved her out the door of the port of Calais, and she had to go back to her friend's house in Austria. She's not allowed into the United Kingdom anymore, simply because she held up a placard in Luton saying Allah is gay. But I saw some people, or pictures of some people in the London Pride March earlier this year, who are doing exactly the same thing. And the BBC's all over, there's gay Muslims, they're holding up a placard saying Allah is gay, and so it's fine in that circumstance, but it's not fine in another circumstance. So what on earth is going on? And how did we get here? I've just got to check how much time I've got left. I've only got 2 minutes left. Oh dear, oh dear. I'll try and be quick. I talk a lot about cultural Marxism, and I write a lot about it. And that's the ideology that's behind political correctness. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto with Friedrich Engels back in 1848. And the Communist Manifesto says that in order to create this wonderful utopian society of equality and social justice, there would have to be a revolution where the oppressed people, the proletariat, would rise up in revolution and overthrow the bourgeoisie, who are the wealthy people who own all of the capital and money and property. And that happened in Russia in 1917. There was a quick, violent communist revolution, and they put into effect Marx and Engels' plan in the Communist Manifesto. Similar things were tried in Austria and Germany and the UK and the USA, but it didn't work. And Marxists were perplexed as to why they could make a revolution happen so easily in Russia, but it was more difficult to happen in Western countries like the UK and Germany. And the conclusion that some of them came to, like Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist, and other communists of the Frankfurt School, was that Western countries had a very, very strong civil society that was based in Christianity. And that would have to be broken down, dissolved and deconstructed first before they could implement this wonderful communist world of social justice and equality and the utopia, which never happens, that Marx envisaged. And so what we've seen particularly over the last 50 years since the Western cultural revolution of the 1960s, which really was a cultural revolution, although it's not seen as such, and ramped up even more since the time of Tony Blair, is a complete deconstruction or attempted deconstruction of all the kind of things that we just take as normal parts of the fabric of our society. Not just Christianity, the Christian faith, but the family, and even now the idea of gender itself, masculinity, femininity, and all these kind of things. Melanie Phillips wrote a book called The World Turned Upside Down, which kind of encapsulates what's going on. Everything that we seem to had in the past, that we had an understanding of what was self-evident truths, are being turned upside down, So everything is the wrong way up, and everything that was considered good is now considered bad, and everything that was considered bad is now considered good. And this process is accelerating and accelerating even more. And I think since Brexit and Trump winning the presidency of the United States, which I think is fantastic, good for President Trump, I think since that's happened, the people who are trying to turn the world upside down have seen that there's a backlash. They cannot believe that all these terrible proles that they think should be just in complete agreement with the intellectual class that's trying to deconstruct our society don't actually agree with them and want to maintain some kind of social conservatism, classic liberalism, tolerance and freedom of speech and freedom of thought that we've had for hundreds of years. And they can't believe that the majority of the people would dare to vote for Brexit, dare to vote for President Trump, support Kaczynski and Orban and Salvini and all Bolsonaro and all these other wonderful leaders that are coming up all over the world who are trying to hold on and re-establish the foundations of our Western civilization as they always have been. So now they're lashing out even more, and they're ramping up the speed and the rapidity in which they're trying to tear everything down and turn everything upside down. But the good news is there's more of us than there are of them. And people are now waking up and realizing what's going on and understanding it and are fighting back. And so what I would just encourage you to do here, as you are here, as I said, we haven't got to the point where you're required to give up your life to fight for freedom. But you may have to lay your reputation on the line and take a little bit of flack on social media. It's horrible, but you can deal with it. And like the person who wrote back to me and said, "Thank God I realise I'm not alone." You are not alone, because there are millions of us, and we just need to realise that we all stand together and we love our country, we believe in freedom, and if we stand up and take back our freedom, we will win. And so let's go out, let's not just sit here and listen to the wonderful speakers here and me. But let's go out and take the battle onwards, and let's win this battle for freedom in our generation so we can leave the fantastic legacy that we've had for our children and our grandchildren in the future. So thank you for coming, and I'll hand over to Harry again. So thank you.
Just one quick question.
Yes.
Okay, you are part of the Brexit Alliance in the GLA.
As it used to be said on Facebook, it's complicated. In the GLA, I sit as the Brexit Alliance. I'm still a member of UKIP. I do that because I did not agree with the direction that UKIP was going in December in tying up with Tommy Robinson and so on. So I stood down as education spokesman in December, and I'm kind of semi-detached from the party leadership. I'm still a member, but I sit in the Brexit Alliance because the other person, Peter Whittle, has gone completely independent. And so it actually gives us advantages to stay as a group.
Yeah, just on that point, Peter Whittle, obviously he's a homosexual, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, so clearly, if anyone was to say that you were a homophobe, that would be a pretty strange thing to say, given that your closest ally in the GLA is a homosexual.
Well, it would. I've always said, when you're an adult, what you do in the privacy of your own home is up to you. I don't mind about that, but I don't have to agree with every single political demand of the LGBT lobbying groups like Stonewall and Mermaids. I don't have to agree with the law that changes the definition of marriage and teaching about LGBT in schools, particularly not to young children who are going to be very, very negatively affected by all of these things, which will confuse them.
Thank you very much. Well, that's the end of the speeches for this evening.